I think it's really interesting, kind of funny that the past generation will say, okay, well, it's all up to you now. When you're my age, you'll be dealing with these things. But like, why not start now? We're still here right now, and I find that's why I find it's weird that they don't want to listen to opinions of young people because like. As I forget who it was, but somebody said this generation is very different from the last. Like fully internet and online, it's very different from the last. And I feel like young people have very modern opinions that even though like they may not be mature, the most mature, sometimes the opinion that works or the idea that works doesn't have to be the most mature. It can be the one that might not actually make sense, but it actually turns out to be the best option.
Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. We've made it to the end of the 2021 school year, this most unprecedented educational experience. If you haven't checked out my last episode, interview with Virginia high school teacher Jessica Kirkland, I encourage you to. We talked pandemic learning, America's racial reckoning, the idea or myth of learning loss, and how we can approach next year with students firmly in the center. Well, today I'm here to put a final wrap on the year and this season of What's the Big Idea with a conversation with students. I'm so happy to be joined today by 6 thoughtful and reflective young adults to get their views on the past 15 months, how they see education in the world, and their thoughts on the future. With me here now are Mabry, Kylie, Leo, Imogen, Ellis, and Jesse. Thank you all so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Kylie, want to start us off? I'm curious, we've just come through, we're still going through the pandemic in a lot of respects, but these past 15 months have been really unusual in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering, what do you take away from these past 15 months, either about yourself, about your education, about the world? What do you think you're going to hold on to 10 years from now when you're thinking back about the pandemic?
I think I've always loved learning about history, and it's really crazy to know that we're going through a time that people are going to be learning about like 100 years from now. And we learned about the Black Plague and Spanish flu, and it's kind of crazy at this time to just think that this is something people are gonna not know what it was like to go through. And we were all basically in our homes, just staying quarantined, and I was kind of shocked that that was all we were doing, but that was exactly what we had to do.
I think it's an interesting situation, especially with you talking about like people are going to learn about us. It provides a lot of perspective on past historical events. You'll read journal entries and they're like, I went to the store today, and you're like, wait, but there was this huge event happening, and now I've lived through it, and I'm just kind of like, oh, they were just doing laundry. So like it makes so much more sense now to read journal entries.
Yeah, I agree with Mabry and Kylie. I feel like when you read about history, it may seem over-exaggerated, kind of like how extreme something was, but when you actually live through it, you're like, okay, like it's a major problem, but it wasn't that bad, really.
Yeah, I wonder, Imogen.
I think now when people look back and learn about this, they'll have even more like in-depth, because now we have like such like incredible technology. They'll be able to really experience like it. And museums now we learned about, they have like lots of takeaways and like masks and documents from what happens in the pandemic, which I thought was really cool.
Else?
I think one great thing that came out of the pandemic was actually the art that inspired, whether it be music or actual uninstalled pieces of art about the pandemic. And we're going to have something to actually reflect on, because people have even started collecting things to kind of remember it, and that's something that we haven't done in the past with these worldwide events.
Yeah. Jesse?
And another thing I'd like to add is people operate kind of differently out of fear. People operate more selfishly, I noticed, at least some people, and then it kind of almost made the situation worse than it was before.
You have any examples of that?
Sort of like when the news of the pandemic first struck, and then people were hoarding like lots of sanitary products. It was a little disheartening to see people sort of acting like they were the only people that were going to be on Earth. Yeah,
I can distinctly remember someone showing me a picture of their spare bedroom, and it was full of toilet paper. Like they literally filled a bedroom with toilet paper, and I'm limited to just buying one, and you have all this. Mary?
Jesse makes a good point. I remember I watched a video that I think my mom sent me at some point, and it was talking about like the other diseases that came from the COVID pandemic, and it was COVID, but then one of them was selfishness, and it showed like obviously a fake graph of a spike of selfishness from the hoarding. But I also feel a lot of us gained compassion because we knew so many people going through such a rough time that we were really able to connect and start to empathize because we were all going through the same thing together. And I also think it was really funny how we kind of reverted back in some ways. Like, I remember when everyone was hoarding things, like yeast was out. So we had a neighbor who knew we had a bunch of yeast and was like, hey, I'll trade you some fresh squeezed orange juice for a few tablespoons of yeast.
Oh my gosh.
So we just went back to the barter system
Yes, yeah, that's
for
like
a
some
little
that's
bit.
like some post-apocalyptic stuff there. Kylie.
I think another example of this is masks in general, because there are people who, you know, were like, at the very beginning, they were like, I don't want to wear a mask because it's uncomfortable and I don't want to wear it. And everyone's like, okay. And then there's other people who are putting on 2 masks. And it's also when I've seen a lot of things on like social media, like TikTok, of teenagers at like college posting, and they're saying, I got COVID, or my family member got COVID, and now they understand why it's important. Like, a lot of people don't think seriously about something until they go through it, which is something you've seen so many times every day. But now this is a big example of it.
Do you think social media helps with that at all? Because I totally agree that people with big events, I think gun violence is another one where we see this, where people they're not impacted until they're impacted. Do you think social media helps with that at all? It helps create empathy where normally there wouldn't be, or maybe not?
I think it depends on the person, you know? Like, when I saw those things, I was like, yeah, maybe I should try to be more careful, but I think other people could take it the wrong way, too.
Yeah, Imogen?
I think social media really has 2 sides, especially during the pandemic. For example, like, let's say you're going on TikTok and there's someone talking about their grandmother who got sick, you know, and that makes you really compassionate and want to be careful. But then there's the other side of people who are like trying to debunk and putting fake news out there, like talking about how bad masks are and how they don't really work. So I think there's really 2 sides, and it depends on what news you really, what you see.
Yeah. Alice?
I think that social media, like specifically TikTok, actually no, all of it, especially for my generation, I think we all kind of developed this sense of like information overload from this pandemic, and it was not a positive thing. We've learned so much from this, but one of the big negatives is that we're kind of numb to a lot of the bigger topics. I mean, I've heard awful things happening around the world, and I've noticed that my friends' reactions are like, oh, that's bad, and that's where it kind of ends at. So it has the positives and the negatives.
Yeah.
Like, I'll see like a news headline, maybe like the first month of the pandemic, and it's like COVID death rates hit their highest, and then I'll be really surprised by that. And then a year into the pandemic, I'll see that again, and it does basically nothing to my mindset because I've just been so used to it.
Leo?
I think social media, especially with like younger generations, even with serious events, people tend to take things not seriously. Like, you know, like the Israel-Palestine conflict, especially on TikTok. Like, you go through the comment section and people are just joking about it. So I think it still taps into the fact that people don't really understand something unless they experience it firsthand, even with social media giving them like a taste of what it really is like for the people that are suffering.
Do you think some of this is a function of just how many things were happening in the past year? I mean, not that things aren't always happening, but after George Floyd's death, and then there's things like this, like global events like Israel, Palestine, and then the pandemic's overlaying all that. Do you think that that's playing into this, that is kind of numbing us to some degree, maybe?
I read an interesting take on desensitization on social media recently, and it was essentially so we all know Instagram stories. You scroll through and you don't tend to pay too much attention because it's just kind of mindless. And it was speaking on Asian hate and when people would post videos of just hate crimes on stories. And it's interesting to learn about, but it becomes part of the norm to just scroll through and see something awful happen to a person. But when you do it every day, it holds less power.
Else?
The other thing with social media, it's seeming to be coming in waves. I've even heard a friend talk about the BLM movement as a trend, and sadly on social media, at least the popularization of and having it actually widespread, it seems like that. because there was a period of time, a few months, where that's all you'd see. And going back to what Mabry said, it was so much. I mean, I've seen so many people going through awful things, and it's when you don't expect it, and it gets to the point where I'm not learning about the situation, I'm just seeing something that I don't understand. But the issue, I mean, with that, it's just, after that, we don't learn anything else about it. We've seen the violence, we've seen the hatred, but then it just moves on to the next topic, and it's just very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Mabry and Ellis said. I feel like people are so used to nowadays seeing like drastic and extreme events on social media that they don't really take it to heart. And kind of like what Ellis said about the BLM protest being somewhat of a trend, I kind of agree with that, because like people would just do things because they see other people doing it, and they don't do it for the sake of causing change. And I feel like that's one of the effects of social media, but it still does a great job of spreading information to lots and lots of people who will take it seriously.
So do you think that in this world, this, I don't know whether it's new or whether things are going to go back to some semblance of normal with the pandemic and BLM, do you feel like by and large education is up to the challenge? Do you feel like school is adequately addressing things that matter? And if so, to what extent? I wonder, Mabry.
Definitely at our school, I feel we've done a lot about talking about current events. I mean, I remember back in the election, we had some conversations that were really important, because I mean, last election, I was in 3rd or 4th grade, so I don't really remember it. And so this year, at least at our school, I feel we have touched on it, but definitely with experience at other schools, sometimes it feels politics and current happenings are like shush topics, like you're not supposed to talk about them loudly, and kids aren't supposed to put their thoughts out into the world. But here it's been better.
Sure. Carolyn?
I think that a big thing that I've seen, again, on social media is people, like kids' mental health is becoming a big issue that's now hitting schools, because kids are posting these videos showing all their missing assignments and basically just ranting to everyone about it, and then they get in trouble with their school, which has happened before, and they come back on TikTok and they tell all their new followers, like, oh, this happened. They post their emails from their teachers and post all these things because that's their way to cope with it. And I think this is hitting some schools harder, because they're thinking, well, we're not looking out for our students, but they think, oh, but we're in a pandemic. You know, we can't do anything about it, when they really can.
It's really hard though with online learning, like, because there's only so much that the school can do, and we're fortunate that we've been able to be in person, but I have friends I know who are still online, and as you said, on TikTok, there's still so many people who have been online all year. And at least for me, it was really easy to get caught in that cycle of like, this assignment's not real because I don't have to hand it in somewhere. So people are procrastinating, and it's really hard to cope when things pile up. But there's only so much that the school can do when they're online, because they just don't have the same resources.
Yeah, Ellis.
I think with me, like, well, what you said, I genuinely, I struggled a lot with online learning. I've always been like a really dedicated student, but it took a big toll on me, because school kind of lost its worth. I didn't see my friends. I wasn't able to have those interactions. And I don't know, but I know many of my friends who also have learning disabilities. Mine is in math. Without being able to ask questions to my teacher or having that interaction, I was so lost, and it made me feel terrible with that, because I didn't know what to do. And I feel like, once again, like Mabry said, the school can only do so much about it. They have no way of really knowing how you're feeling. But I, at least some of my friends' schools, it was disappointing to see their reactions to a lot of those things.
Yeah, Jesse.
And also, it's much easier to kind of ask a teacher a question, either like passing by the hallway or in like homeroom or something, than have to like write out an email, because it's very formal. You have to think exactly about what you're going to say, and sometimes you might not get to the actual root of what you're struggling with in the class.
Were there any benefits to learning online? I mean, at one point we all were, and then at another point some of us were. I think, Jesse, you probably were the longest of all of us. I mean, Jesse, do you feel like there were some benefits? Because what I'm wondering is, when the next school year comes along at this school or any school, is there a benefit to letting some students learn online, or is it really just all downside?
There's some benefits. I think definitely it was a lot quieter online. Not that my cohort or homeroom is loud. Sometimes there, but it's not consistently. But I'd say that a lot of the time I do sometimes miss having like my own like dedicated area for school and then working and having that sort of schedule, and also not having to commute is a benefit, and generally not having to wake up as early is also a benefit.
After moving and like moving to here and then going online school, so I didn't know anybody and I was online. So I really felt like I did not have any friends because I really didn't, and I was online. So I think that was really like took a toll. But then as soon as I came back, then I got into this like the system of how things worked, and I thought that was really beneficial. But while I was online, like not only did I not was in contact with anybody, but when you're doing online school, like when you're sitting in your bed laying down doing online school, you're not in that school environment and you're not focusing as you would at school, and that really like affects how much you're working onto it and how much you're doing the work, especially since you're not actually turning in assignments.
Leo.
Yeah, I agree with Imogen, but also I think it depends on the person. Like some people might like a more relaxed environment. It might help them learn better. And like being around less people might help them to focus more. But then just going back to online school as a whole, I think in the school's defense, they were so worried about getting education for the students that they weren't thinking about the smaller things, like would students get bored? Would they even pay attention in class? And I think considering it was like, for our school, it's like 1 week this teachers had to make a program, I think they did a really great job.
Kylie.
This is back to what Ellis said earlier. I was actually like the exact opposite. I put everything I had into my schoolwork during online school because that was all I had to do. So it was very different for me. I would pay attention in class and do my homework, and then I started reading more because when I was done with schoolwork, I was like, my brain is still moving. I need to do more stuff. And at a certain point, my parents talked to me and they were like, you need to calm down on all your schoolwork, because that was all I was doing because I could not handle everything else.
It gave you some structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I got pretty like down, depressed, with online school because my brain was going, but there was nothing to channel it into. I was waking up at like 10. I'd start school at 10:30 because our online classes weren't required last year. I'd wake up at 10:30, be done by 12, and that was my day, and the rest of it I had to structure. And then for now, when we have some online learners, this is about to sound selfish, but I dislike having both online and in person because it feels like it's unfair to everyone. Because if the teacher's paying attention to online, they can't switch their focus like they can with in-person students. It has to be just the online students. So I feel that we sometimes get left out, but if they pay too much attention to us, the online students are missing out. And if you put just the online students with one teacher, that's unfair to that one teacher to be seeing black screens for every class all the time. So it's kind of a difficult balance. So I feel what is best is having everyone in person.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And I'll just speak for myself. I mean, typically in this mixed situation, the parallel or the remote learners lose out, right? It's much easier to teach the people in the room with you and sometimes kind of forget about the ones online. Ellis?
With me, like I shared a similar experience to Mabry. I came to the school, I'd say middle to end of last year, and the issue was that I wasn't able to form any strong bonds besides Mabry, which I was very grateful for. But I felt really alone, and I didn't know who to reach out to or how to do so. And I think that's awesome that like I have a lot of friends who really benefited from the online learning structure. But with me, I lost all motivation to continue. I mean, even trying to work, because I was without my peers and all that. So it's interesting to see. I think that especially with incoming freshmen, when they won't have known the teachers before, I think that could be more complicated to do online. But other than that, if it benefits them,
yeah,
I think it's a good structure.
Just sort of stick with school here for a second. So a lot of like historians and sociologists talk about change in a country being generational, right? That within a certain generation, people generally don't change that much, or views don't change, but it changes a lot from one generation to the next. You all are about 14 years old, and your teachers are all roughly a generation older than you, maybe a little bit more. We're all probably 30 plus years older than you. What's the biggest difference between your generation and us? What would you say is the biggest difference?
I would say the biggest difference, this does not speak for everyone. I think having an open mind to new ideas is genuinely the biggest thing that we have. I mean, even just speaking to our parents, I don't know about you guys, but with me, it's kind of having that conflict of beliefs and not having other generations being accepting of new ideas. And I think that's one really wonderful thing about our generation, because we do have our downsides. We can be, really harsh about some things, and I hate to have such a generalization over it, but I'd say that we have been one of the most open to new ideas, concepts, and supportive of the general well-being of our generation and the ones after us.
I think open-mindedness is a good part of our generation. However, with open-mindedness, there's also this like opposite side of cancel culture, which I really don't like, and I don't support cancel culture. And I think like that idea of hating on someone for something because it's so clearly a mistake. And I think we really need to kind of get that out of this generation and that mindset of canceling someone, because that's just very unhealthy. And I think that's something we really need to change.
Okay. Maybe.
I think we are mostly open-minded, but as Imogen just said, cancel culture is really a huge thing in our society, and I'm not saying we should be open to mindsets that hurt people and groups, but I feel that cancel culture can extend too far. I mean, one of the examples that I think about a lot is like people not reading Dr. Seuss and giving up Dr. Seuss books, because in his earlier works he had racist comments and depictions. But if you look at his publications after the civil rights movement, he was actually pretty open-minded with the times, and he was changing his viewpoints in his publications to match what was popular and what was, the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels sometimes we don't look at people growing, we tend to see them as obsolete and always the same.
Okay, that's fair. Leo?
Yeah, kind of like what Mabry said. I think our generation, especially with social media, I think social media is a big factor in this all. But you tend to develop an opinion off of a first like judgment of something, versus like an older generation. I feel like they have it more like ingrained in their brain what their opinions are about something, and they're not so quick to judge something. Versus like us, like you see something on social media, all of a sudden, boom, you're in favor of that point. Then you see something against it and you're like, oh, well, now where do I go? So I think a big difference is like how quick you make your judgments.
Okay.
I'm not trying to like attack the other generation, but
Attack away, Kylie. Attack away.
What I've seen from like talking to some adults and what I've seen on news articles and social media and everything is that yes, we can be more open-minded or more judgmental, and the older generation might have this sort of idea in their heads, but I feel like they are very judgmental of us because we are the first generation that grew up completely with the internet and technology, and we are basically formulating everything for how future generations are going to use it. And because the other generations are adults, they're very judgmental to how we use social media, because obviously they're older and have gone through their lives and think they know what is best, but we have a lot of different opinions from them, and they're kind of quick to say, no, you shouldn't post that, you shouldn't do that, but we feel like we have to. So
Else?
I'm going to say two things, but going off of what you just said, I think that a lot of the times we're not taken very seriously because we're younger, and I think we constantly hear the phrase, well, back when we were kids. I know that back when you were kids, you were out in the middle of the nowhere in the snow, not wearing any pants. I'm just kidding. But you get the idea. Exactly. But the truth is, we've kind of matured much faster because of our exposure to all this social media and what's going on in the world. I mean, I think we've all been told at least once, especially the kids in this room, you're so mature for your age. I know that that's the biggest thing that I hear from adults. And it is true. But with that being said, it's kind of keeping those things equal, because you're so mature for your age, you're so smart. But you can't think these things. You're too young to have your own opinions on this.
And yeah, and that's actually one of the questions I wanted to get to what degree you feel like you're listened to by parents, teachers, other adults, like taken seriously when not condescended to, when your opinion really matters. Do you feel like you are? Maybe.
I feel like it's as Alice just said, it's a really weird balance, because we're told, this is one of my pet peeves, I hate when older generations will say, oh, your generation is going to change the world, because I'm always like, but what about your generation? Why don't you fix the mistakes that you made? So we get told that a lot, and we get told, well, you guys are going to be the great generation that fixes the earth and everyone's going to live happily ever after. But then, especially on social media, we'll have what other generations think of as kind of radical ideas, and they very much so don't like it. You know, it's a pretty quick, well, you shouldn't think that because you're really young, so you don't know what you're talking about. And I actually do think it's interesting to see just how many kids in our generation have stepped up. I mean, you talked about mass shootings earlier, and watching the Florida survivors just really speak up on that, and like Greta Thunberg speaking at the UN, and she's a teenager. I mean, we are definitely stepping up, but it is often met with criticism.
What do you think about that, Jesse? Do you feel like your voice matters?
Well, to a lot of the adults I'm around, like teachers or parents, they're often very supportive, and they try their best to like understand my concerns about a situation. Like for teachers, like an assignment or a due date for an assignment or a lesson. But I think that oftentimes it's hard, at least for me, to get kind of my voice out there just in generally in the public. Because like for me, at least, I don't post that much on social media or anything. And we're at that point where we have our own opinions about the world, but we can't like vote or anything. So it's almost like it kind of stays in there, and you can talk about it with your parents, and it's helpful to get kind of other viewpoints on there. But it's definitely a factor in terms of how we're able to spread our voice and our opinion.
I think kids, and especially our age, should be listened to, but I only really believe that you should share your opinion once you have evidence to back it up and once you've done your research on a topic, because especially on social media, when you're getting all this information, especially it's portrayed in a certain light, you might be like, wow, like how are people not so sure about this? But then they go off that research and they share about this, but you really need to understand all sides of the argument, and you need to respect the different opinions of that in order to have a solid argument and opinion. And I think there really needs to be that balance and change in that.
So do you think social media encourages uninformed opinions?
Yes, for sure. I think so.
Yeah. Leo?
Yeah, I think social media definitely encourages uninformed opinions. Kind of because, like I said earlier, it's like people make judgments really quickly. So you see one thing and then you make an opinion off of it, but you may not be seeing the whole story. And it's really easy to get swayed based on social media. Like persuading people, there's people that just do it for fun, like Twitter especially. People will just make controversial tweets just because they want to stir things up. And I think that's a big part of why there's so many differing opinions and a lot of just people arguing all the time.
Yeah. Jesse?
And to kind of add to what Leo says, it's just because social media moves so fast, and it's kind of, and I mean, even though it's been here for a couple years, it's still a relatively new form of media. So people aren't as aware of, how quickly things can change in terms of like how people on the internet think of something, or how new facts come out. But the thing is, like, topics move so quickly and we see them so much that it doesn't really stick in our mind for us to take in the new information.
So Mabry, you brought up earlier this point that, people see your generation is going to change the world, right? We were told similar things, and hopefully my generation has done some good things. But what does that mean to you? Like, what are the big issues facing the world, the country, that you feel like your generation has a chance to change?
My number one would be pollution, and it often really makes me kind of mad to talk about, because I feel like the world changed so much in the 1900s. It changed faster than at any other point in history, and so I'm not surprised we can't keep up. And it's hard because I feel like the past generation made mistakes. I mean, back in the 70s, scientists realized that oil companies, like, those pollutants would cause greenhouse gas emissions, and they didn't publish it. So it wasn't common information. So I feel there are mistakes made by the last generation, and the last generation can sometimes have a mindset of like, they don't want to change. They're saying, well, we've used plastic water bottles for this long, we've used oil for this long, and it's not something they want to change. So I feel putting the whole burden on us, when you look at our government and who's actually in charge, it is the generation that made the mistakes. It feels like kind of a trap of like, I can't get out of this.
I think it's really interesting, kind of funny that the past generation will say, okay, well, it's all up to you now. When you're my age, you'll be dealing with these things. But like, why not start now? We're still here right now, and that's why I find it's weird that they don't want to listen to opinions of young people, because like, as I forget who it was, but somebody said this generation is very different from the last. Like, fully internet and online, it's very different from the last. And I feel like young people have very modern opinions that, even though like they may not be mature, the most mature, sometimes the opinion that works or the idea that works doesn't have to be the most mature. It can be the one that might not actually make sense, but it actually turns out to be the best option.
Yeah, and Imogen brought up the point about having informed, evidence-based opinions, and I mean, people my age and older are just as guilty of having completely uninformed opinions that are based on nothing more than an ideology.
For me, a big problem I see in the world is consumerism, because we're kind of put in this mindset from a very young age. It's like, especially when you see it, it's like, okay, but now this is a new trend. Okay, so now I have to buy these kinds of pants, but then next year or next season, when I need warmer clothes, I'm going to buy all of this. And that also really contributes to what I think is the biggest problem, which is climate change and sustainability. And I think we really need to learn that we don't need like the newest iPhone when it comes out. Our phone is still perfectly fine. And I think we really need to understand that marketing is driving us to buy all these different things, which is contributing to this insane climate change. And we don't really need these products. And it's just kind of this rapid like circle of not getting out when you see the newest thing and you're in this mindset of buying. And I think we really need to kind of stop that and look at what do we really need. And it's about quality, not quantity.
I think that one of the biggest issues with that is the blame on consumers. I mean, I know we play a big part in it, but you can see this even with clothing. I think a great example would be with iPhones. We already know that, I mean, as time goes on, Apple does, they have admitted to, they do mess with it a bit. Your phone is going to work slower, and it's not because it's old, it's because they have newer phones coming out. And along with that, we make such a big point. I mean, I think this generation too, but as a general statement, we're all trying, not all, many of us are trying to stop ocean pollution in general. But one of the biggest issues is the root source, and we have no control over that. That's something that generation still has complete control over, but they've decided to kind of let that go. And what I hear a lot is, oh, we'll be dead by then. You'll be dead by then? What about my grandchildren? What about their children? It is so disappointing to hear that kind of removing yourself from the situation.
And kind of to add to what Ellis said, people sometimes don't take issues as seriously if they think, oh, that's really far in the future, it probably won't affect me, because it's not. They don't see it as serious as like an immediate pressing issue. And in a way, that might be true, but also thinking of just yourself and just how it's going to affect your life is not really a great way if you want to actually improve the world.
Yeah. Avery.
I'm with Ellis in that consumerism is often blamed for pollution, when in reality it tends to be huge corporations that are hurting our planet the most. And with social media, we continue to blame consumers, and all the steps that are taken are okay. One of my pet peeves again is the whole plastic straws movement, because if you look at the numbers, plastic straws make up 0.03% of ocean pollution. And it felt like we talked a lot about plastic straws, and in California you have to ask for one, and bamboo, paper, like all these other types of straws came out, but then it stopped. Then we stopped talking about ocean pollution. But when you look at trash in the ocean, 50% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is fishing nets. They come from fishing corporations. So it feels like consumerism is often blamed, and when we attack the problem, we go for what's easily taken control of, which in this case was plastic straws.
Yeah.
But then we stop.
Yeah, and to an earlier point, we're overwhelmed by topics and issues, and how long can you stay focused on something before it wears you down?
I noticed that a lot of you brought up like big industries and big companies, and the big thing is that in our world, the laws in countries are against us doing things about this because we're too young. You know, we don't have our own houses or our own credit cards. We don't have our own jobs, and obviously,
drive.
Yeah, we kind of need to drive. But a big thing is that adults say, you know, you'll do this when you're old enough. And then we say, okay, well, here's my idea. And they hold all of the power because they're the ones who can do something about it. and we tell them our opinion, and they say, okay, I'll see what I can do. And they do nothing because they don't want to. Yeah, they're like, oh, that's kind of a cute idea. We'll let your generation handle that.
And usually when all else fails, we say, your brains aren't fully developed yet.
Oh,
Exactly.
that one. I love that one.
It's a
That
classic.
doesn't mean you can't form good opinions.
It's a classic. We pull that's our trump card when we really want to stop debate. Leah.
Yeah, I think again on consumerism, like it's no secret that companies exist to make money. And how they do that is by exploiting people, and especially I think through social media. Social media is like really easy you can get to a lot of people and you can sway their judgment quickly. And it's kind of like the fear of missing out type thing with like trends, and you might just want to fit in. You might want to be want to be accepted. You want to meet the social norm. And I think the social norm today is buying a lot of clothes and any other like products that you might want. And it's like the celebrities that have like they're advertising their own product lines. They make you think that if you buy this, you can turn into me. But in reality, it's not that at all. It's hundreds of other things. And I think that's kind of like, it's sad that people really believe that that's true. And I think that's just kind of another way that companies are exploiting people in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love me some Billie Eilish, but when I see her promoting her upcoming tour along with her new Billie Eilish themed line of products, I just can't. I'm like, at two, Billie, at two. Go ahead, Alice.
I want to bring it back, and I don't mean to repeat this, but to the trend thing. I mean, I felt like after we were kind of done with all the movements for the plastic straws and save the turtles, we'd pat ourselves in the back, we'd pick our bags up, and we left. We left that topic. And I think that keeping the attention span on these big topics is one of the other issues with it. I feel like we struggle with that.
What I also mean by consumerism, though, is you vote with your dollar, where you put your money. If you put your money into the meat industry and you're supporting this incredible aspect to climate change, which I know is not the only part, because I know there's a lot of roles, but if you contribute to this mass-produced fishing and these like fish farms, where you're putting your money, that industry is now growing. And that's what I mean by consumerism, not only in what that one aspect, but the two aspects of it.
That's definitely a good point, in that putting your money places is causing corporations, right? But the other issue is that corporations hold so much over us, especially like here in America. I mean, everyone says, okay, cut out Amazon because, it's Amazon. People will say, okay, try and cut out Amazon. I never order from Amazon. Sure, you don't order from Amazon, but do you go to one of how many businesses that Amazon owns? You can't cut a corporation out of your life simply because in America monopolies get so huge that you can't cut them out of your lives.
Okay. Let me just move on because I don't getting a little low on time. So give me a reason to be optimistic about the future.
Our generation's not great at that.
It's really
No,
really
it's
not.
actually interesting because you talk to therapists and you'll find that they say that it's hard to instill hope in our generation. They'll say it's hard to make people feel better because they can't really say, but what about the future? Because we just have such a bleak view of what's going to happen.
Is that
when we're
true?
older.
Do you six have a bleak view of the future or a pessimistic view of the
You
future?
can go down that road really
What
easily.
do you think, Leah?
I mean, I think it goes both ways. For one, our world is not like in a good place, like with climate change and everything. But we have the resources. We have technology. And if we can find a way to work together, we can overcome it. So we have all the right tools. It's just a matter of using them. So I think some people tend to look at the fact that, we're in such a poor situation, but thousands of years ago, people were in worse situations. And I think we're lucky that we have all this technology and we can easily overcome these challenges compared to past generations.
I think a lot of our generation is suffering from existential depression, which is like when we hear about all these terrible things happening, it's really hard to find hope. Like, yeah, it is hard to see something good when like we feel like we're destroying our world and we're the last hope. But I think then, as Leo was saying, like with our technology that we have, I think if we put our mindset into like a different gear, and if we really, as a generation, as a community, and not just one person, like, or doing it for like a week, like it needs to be a full-on change, and there needs to be a change if we want to have a bright future. And I think there can be hope as soon as we're willing to make the change.
What's new gear? What do you mean by that? I like this idea.
What I mean by that is like right now, I think we're all really stuck in this not great place. Like I'm just gonna be honest. I don't think social media is great. I don't think it's great. And I think once we kind of move past that, and once we're old enough, and not like that, but like once we kind of grow up realizing that social media is not what's our main point of our lives, because I think right now it's like how many likes I get or something like that does really affect people and that their confidence. And I think once we realize that we are beyond that and we have a bigger purpose for being here, and then we shift into that more worldly view and what's going to happen, I think then that's the new year.
I think that being blissfully ignorant and also or hopeless, I feel like they're just as bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like as I feel like trying to ignore what's going on is just as bad as kind of like submerging yourself in absolute hopelessness, because in either of those things you're not going to act, because one, you're just not motivated because you think there's no hope, and one, you think there's nothing going wrong. So I think you have to kind of strike a balance between caring about the issue enough to act, but not really reading so much into it that you yourself become stagnant in your in how you act and how you behave in terms of the problem.
I think another thing is that, I've heard many generations say, and I hate to keep using this term, but it is true. Once we all come together, we're seeing this kind of world coming together, world peace. But I think that despite social media's many, many flaws and how it works and how it can negatively affect us, we have been brought together a lot more. I mean, I have friends in Canada and friends in China that I've met online, and I'm genuinely really close to them. And I think that reaching that kind of communal outlook on what we should do, especially with, I can say at least for America, I know many other countries, we have this very large divide in beliefs. It's really one side or the other. As a person, I kind of like to have an objective standpoint on most political topics, because I want to see how it affects people I know on every side of the issue. But it seems to be harder with that. But I truly think that since we're so much connected, that maybe we'll be able to reach something better.
Yeah, that connectivity, I think, was sort of the dream of the early internet before it became corporate. And let's get a little philosophical here, Kylie. So, what makes a good life in your view?
For me, I think what would make a good life for me, what would make me satisfied, is I think growing up I always had one dream. My brain was always set on one career, one focused path. But really inside of that, there's this feeling that I want from life, and I want to feel this range of emotions. I really want to live, and it doesn't matter what career I have, who I'm with, as long as it's what I've always been wanting, which is just a feeling. People say, I want to go to this school, I want to do this and this. The truth is, if you don't get into that school, your life will keep going. So I feel like what makes a good life is just being okay with life moving and you having to go with it.
Yeah, I think especially for me, it's like when my life's about to come to the end, I want to look back on it and not have any regrets. I want to be like, okay, this happened. It may not have gone in my favor, but since I took this other path, this, and this happened, and these all benefited me. So I think you just have to look at it on the positive side, because nothing's going to be perfect. But I think for me, a good life would be making choices that will benefit me in the future.
Alice?
For me, I think it's just being happy with what I've done, and like what I've done for others, most importantly, because I see a lot of people saying, well, none of this matters anyway. And there's many different debates. I love going into ethics and all that, and more stuff like that, philosophy. But I've heard, we're just a floating rock and it doesn't matter what we do. And yes, kind of, sure. But I think that what makes me happiest as a person is just doing something good for someone else, like no matter how little it is, and being able to look back and know that I affected someone else's life a little bit is really meaningful to me, because I know that there's a very large chance that I won't be remembered, and I'm okay with that. If I help someone, that's enough for me.
A teacher here said that he wants to live every day like it's the best day of his life, and I thought that was like a really sweet way to look at it, because if you go in more depth to it, I feel like if I have a good life, I will be content. And when I look back, I want to say, like, every day I really thought and I really was happy, or I really was content with how I was going, and I laughed a lot, and I had friends, and I made a difference in a good way. And I think that's what will really have a good life, because in the end, it doesn't matter what school you go to. But I think if you really look back and said, yeah, I really loved every day that I lived, I think that would make a good life for me.
I think patience and improvement are two really important topics to be discussed when you want to lead a good life, because improvement, I mean, if you're trying your best to improve every day, and even if you fail one day, it's not like you failed for your entire life in trying to improve yourself. And having patience with yourself and others is just a really important skill to learn, or trait to kind of adopt, because patience is something that without it, it would make life a lot harder than it actually has to be for a lot of people.
Maybe.
I'd have to say, for my life, I want to be known as more than just like a number or a place, you know? Like, I don't want to be like, oh, she got this on the SAT, she went to this school. I think, as Ellis said, connecting with others would really make a good life. And as Kylie kind of said, going with the flow, just being your own person and being accepting of who you and other people are, even when it changes. I mean, I think that's what makes a good life, is the ability to pivot when things don't go your way, and to have more of a personality than just being kind of material or like arbitrary things.
Else.
I think one more thing. I can say everyone in this room has experienced rough times, but I think one of the most important aspects of life is experiencing those challenges. I don't just want to, and I'm not saying what you were saying this Imogen, I loved yours too, but personally, just with my own beliefs, I want to look back and know that I tried my best, and that I went through stuff, and I came out the other side, because that is one thing that I have to face every day, and I know you guys do too, in your own ways, and just, you know, realizing that I made it, I got there, and I kept going.
Thanks. All right, we're going to bring this to a close here. Big thanks today to my guests, 6 very thoughtful students. And to you, dear listener, congratulations on reaching the end of this school year. Have a relaxing, recharging summer. I hope this season of What's the Big Idea has given you a lot to think about. As always, I welcome comments, questions, and complaints on Twitter and Instagram at Big Idea Ed, speaking of social media. Be on the lookout for new episodes in late summer. Thanks for listening, and take care. Done.
We were the closing episode.
You were the season finale.
I want your listeners to know I'm not
Thanks, everybody.
completely not